Hey guys, Katie here from Equestrian Movement. How are we all going this evening? So just checking in. Today we're going to be talking about nailing our canter leads and how to get our strike offs, making sure that our horse is getting the correct canter lead each time. If you have any questions, feel free to pop them in the comments box as we go, and I'll see if I can get to them. If you're feeling a little bit uncomfortable about sharing in the group, or you have any questions that you don't want to publicly post, feel free to message Sarah or I, and we'll try and get around to answering them. And if we think that they'll help others, we'll talk about them in the group as well. So we're talking canter leads. I remember canter leads being really difficult when I was a kid. I started riding quite young, when I was 7, and I remember driving home from my lessons with my mum and being like, did you figure out if you had the correct canter lead or not? And she'd be like, no. And then, what about you? I'd be like, no. And I remember it taking a really long time, being able to check my canter lead and being able to check my rising trot diagonal. I think took years. Not to mention, I think I had about a year off of cantering after my first fall because I was too scared. But from riding professionally, riding lots and lots of different horses and breaking horses in, and starting green horses, I can tell you that teaching the cue is actually really easy. It's particularly easy if you are clear, consistent, and follow through on your aid, and you also are keeping your horse curious and engaged in learning. So this is what we talk about in training trainability is your horse in a learning frame of mind when you're working it? Does it want to learn? If your horse is in a learning frame of mind and it wants to learn, then teaching the canter lead is really easy, especially with green horses if they don't have any previous injuries and they haven't had a whole heap of riding that has potentially made them work crooked or overdeveloped one way more than the other. So if as far as the cue for the correct canter lead goes, that's really easy to teach. What is hard is if our horses are crooked and more developed one way than the other, the canter lead is more developed one way than the other. If we have to do reconditioning for straightness, that's when it gets tricky. So when I first learnt this, I was riding my pony, and I remember it so vividly because there was one canter lead that my pony would never get, and I stumbled across the fact that if I rode my horse in my little pony in counterflexion, I would always get the canter lead that he couldn't get, but I wouldn't be able to get that canter lead if I had him in true bend. And the reason why this really stuck with me was because I was like, yay, I found a trick that works. I can get the correct canter lead every time now. But then I did it in a lesson with my instructor, and my instructor said to me, you're really lucky your horse picked up that canter lead that time because you had it in counterflexion. And I was a little girl, so I wasn't going to say anything to my instructor about that, but I was like, actually, I know that I wasn't really lucky that he got the canter lead because I know that's how to get the canter lead on that horse. And so there's a few things to take away from that. That just because your instructor is a good rider doesn't always mean that they're a good teacher. So she probably should have figured out why counterflexion worked so well for my horse and helped me break that down, and we would have figured out that was because he was working crooked. So now, like, looking back at that, I can see that he wasn't working correctly when I was riding him. He was training crooked, and we'll go into that a little bit later. But basically, if they are not able to pick up the correct canter lead easily, then it's generally because they've loaded their weight into that shoulder, and so they can't strike off the aid. So when essentially, to get the correct canter lead, we can cue train that in. That's why it can be so easy to teach. But if they haven't been conditioned straight and balanced with lift through the shoulder, that's when it gets tricky for them to react correctly to the cue trained aid. So the most hang on, let me go back to TJ. So TJ, he really stuck with me about the fact that I could get him into canter in counter flexion, even though that was the incorrect way to ride canter. Obviously, you should have your horse bent around your inside leg, but I never truly got, when I had him, why that worked, and so the inside hind wouldn't have been coming through on that canter lead, and his balance would have been in that shoulder that he should have been lifting to strike off with. So popping him into the counter flexion frees up the shoulder so that he could get that strike off lead easily, even though technically it should have been harder for him. And I see this a lot with the horses that I work with. I'm going to throw Drully under the bus with this one because she's probably the most recent one that I've worked with that I have fresh in my brain. The way that our horse figures out how to get underneath himself is really important, so that he can free up his shoulder and take the shoulder out to get the canter lead. So if you've got a horse that, even though you've ridden that canter lead a few times, they're still not picking it up, and you know you're being clear on the aid and they're still not picking it up, there's a good chance it's because they aren't working straight. So one of the things that I will do is just figure out, what can I do to get the canter lead? So does that mean, you let them drop the shoulder? Do you push the shoulder out? Do you push the shoulder in? Do you swing the hindquarters? Do you put them over a pole? Do you put them on a straight line? What can you do that helps your horse actually pick up the canter lead? And so this is another time when we're talking about, you are the best person for your horse. You know your horse the best. You know the ins and the outs and the ups and the downs. You know what they feel like when they're resisting, what they feel like when they're working well. You know what they're doing when they are resisting. You know how they're getting out of work. So if you just dig in a little bit deeper and you problem solve that a little bit deeper, you'll be able to see, oh, that canter lead isn't coming up because, so that could be because they're weak on that hind leg, or they're not bending around that leg properly, or maybe you need to spend some time tuning your horse into your aids to get the strike off. Maybe you need to put a pole down to get them to canter over. Figuring out what your horse actually needs to free up the shoulder to get the correct canter lead is the first thing that you need to do with a horse that's always picking up the wrong canter lead. Once you can figure out what that horse needs to get the correct canter lead, then it's super easy to essentially cue train it, to train it into the cue. I think one of the things that we do with our horses is we really underestimate how intelligent they are. I can literally work with a green horse or a green broken horse and just tap their shoulder, and within a couple of rides they know that that's the canter lead that you want. If you are consistent, so every time you ask, that's what you're getting, and you're clear. So tapping on the shoulder is super clear. Sometimes where we put our legs for our canter aids initially isn't clear enough for our horses, and you follow through. So you've got to make sure that you follow through into the canter, and so that's why we'll talk a little bit later on how to apply the rule of 3 to actually get the canter leads, and when to back off and when to push. So being able to first figure out what your horse needs to get that canter lead. And sometimes it does mean that you have to go back to basics, which is why we've developed green to self-carriage, is that a lot of the problems that our horses have in their training has a lot to do with the fact that their head is down behind the vertical and they're balancing on the forehand instead of balancing their weight on their hindquarters, or because they're not distributing their weight evenly through their body. So that includes their hindquarters and their shoulders. Horses will tend to be straight and strong to the right and supple but weak to the left. So a lot of the times we'll see horses not really wanting to bend to the right, and so they're not engaging that hind super well, but they may be over bending to the left and so a bit weaker that way. So depending on your own horse's nuances, maybe your horse picks up the right canter lead really easily because they're strong enough that they can do it a little bit straighter and get that lift, or maybe they pick it up to the left really easy because they can bend super easy, and so that bend is helping them get the correct canter lead every time. So figuring out what your horse needs to get into the canter on the lead that they don't like is your first priority, and then you can tune it back. The horses also, if you've got a horse that somebody else has ridden, they're trained into somebody else's aids. This is particularly important in the canter because everybody has a different way of riding canter, and the way that you ride a green horse into canter is different to the way that you ride a developed horse into canter. A green horse, it's okay for you to be a little bit forward and them to run into the canter just a smidge, like maybe 1 to 2 strides, because they're not developed enough through their back to actually pop that canter stride. And so you're almost in a forward 3-point seat to kind of get off of their back so that they can jump into canter, they can round their back a little bit into canter. But a more developed horse, your seat aids start to be what communicates the canter. So you're looking for that slight flick of your pelvis so that that inside hip is flicking the inside hind through into the correct canter lead. So as your horse and your riding becomes more developed, the aid refines, in the way that the horse pops into it gets better. So if your experience riding is on advanced horses, you go on a green horse and you try and use your seat, all you're going to do is hollow their back away from you, and they're not going to get that canter lead to work. If your experience is on a green horse and you ride an advanced horse and you don't know how to use your seat, you're not going to get either, because you're not using your seat in a way that communicates to your horse. So that's why I like to almost trick train them, cue train them into just that little tap on the shoulder to say, hey, this is the lead that I want, and then I can associate that back to my leg aid, and then I can associate that back to a seat aid slowly over time. If we get that really clear, then down the track when we want to do trot through, walk through, simple changes, and flying changes, it becomes really easy because the horse is very aware of what canter lead you're asking for from the way that you have trained them into that cue. So a couple of ways that we look at getting our horse to be even and balanced. We need to have a really well-established rein back. If our rein back isn't working, and I think I'm talking about this in a blog soon, or we've definitely been doing some posts for it. If your rein back isn't working, then your half halt pretty much isn't working, because your reins tell your horse to shift onto their haunches in the half halt. And so if your horse isn't thinking rein back from your rein aids, then when you do a half halt, they're probably not thinking sit into your haunches. So rein back is one of my top priorities for getting good canter leads. And secondly, evenness and balance. As we're talking, I need the horse to be bending evenly and correctly both ways. So making sure they're getting that weight distribution and that shift in the weight, and getting the correct bend so that they can pick the canter up, and then putting a pole down. So getting the transition over the pole, because particularly when you're getting a green horse to become an educated horse so that it actually does lift into the canter, the pole is that incentive to get them to lift. Otherwise, they just drag themselves into the canter on the forehand, and if your horse is traveling on the forehand, then it's just going to pick up whatever canter lead it's most comfortable with. So if we put that pole down, we can get a little extra bounce, and that bounce is what makes it easier for them to lift that shoulder through to get the correct canter lead. So a couple of things that we think about when and the reason why canter leads came up in the first place is how do we apply the rule of three. So last week we talked about the rule of three just being a rule that I like to use to keep our ego in check, so that we don't spend too long on one exercise doing too much. And so obviously canter leads is one of those things where if your horse picks up the wrong canter lead, you go, oh, I need to get this better because I need him to pick up my canter lead correctly every time I ask. And so then we can definitely end up overriding this exercise with our horse because we're not getting any progress, and then we're just making our horse sour. So the first thing that we need is just to transition into canter, right? You just need to be able to say canter on and your horse canters on. So if you set that as your goalpost, then you can adjust from there. So if the first time you ask your horse to canter, it canters. The second time you ask your horse to canter, it canters. The third time you ask your horse to canter, it canters. Yay! Your horse knows how to canter from your leg aid, okay? So that means that they're ready for the next progression. You don't progress that time. You're assessing, does my horse understand canter on as an aid? And so you've done the 3 goes there. Excuse me. You've found that your horse understands canter on. Okay, good. Then we can adjust our goalpost. Does my horse understand the canter lead? And so this is where you want to get really clear with your aid. The way that I do it and the way that I find works really well to keep the aid super clear is outside leg says get ready to, inside leg says canter on. So you're using your outside leg to get your horse thinking about cantering, and you want to wait and feel for the shift of balance, and then your inside leg says canter on. So the reason why I find this super effective for my training is because when we're doing our dressage tests and we get up the levels, we need to be able to do our transitions on the ladder, and our strike offs on the ladder, and we need to be able to communicate which canter lead we want on a straight line. So using the single leg for the strike off when I want it means that when I need to refine it to be able to ask for canter lead at the ladder, I'm going to nail that every time. And if my horse understands what leg I'm using is the canter lead I want, then they're going to nail that as well every time. And so then when it comes to our walkthrough simple changes, there's not a bunch of setting up that we need to get the horse into that canter lead. They know exactly what lead they're striking off on. Excuse me. And same with our flying changes. We've got it so well drummed into our horse that when I put this leg here, it means strike off on that leg. So the other way that I will help to reinforce that, as I said, is just give them a little touch on the shoulder and say this canter lead. And I think it's worked for every horse that I've ridden, no matter how slow to learn they are or how fast to learn they are. A little touch on the shoulder and they'll strike off that canter lead once they know that's what the end game is. So we've got the transition into canter nailed, and then we're looking at getting the correct lead into the canter. So making sure that we're not over repeating the same aid and not getting our desired result. So So let me think of some examples here. If you've got to the 4th, the 5th, the 6th ask and your horse is still not getting the correct canter lead, you need to stop and you need to think, you've missed something. Am I clear in my communication of what I'm trying to ask my horse to do? Have I set up the exercise so that if there is any problems with the horse's lift through that shoulder, I've made it easy for them? Do I need to go back down my training scale and train better straightness through my horse? So that's commonly an issue with these canter leads, is once you've got the communication nailed, it's the straightness. So it may mean that you need to go back and do, like in our Green to Self Carriage course, your easier, more simple exercises to make sure that they're getting that shift in weight distribution and they're getting around the leg properly first before you then can go back up and get the canter leads. So a couple of rules of thumb that I will use there is, if they're really getting the canter lead one way but not getting the canter lead the other way, we can want to get the canter lead the other way because we're like, yay, look at us, we got the canter lead this way. But what happens then is that you're going to continue to overdevelop that shoulder to lift and underdevelop the other shoulder to lift, so you're making your horse more crooked. If you've got a horse picking up a canter lead really well one way and not very well the other way, you only want to do it enough times the good way to associate that you're trying to get a particular lead. So you might even just do it once. You tap the shoulder, you say, I want this canter lead, and then when they get it, good horse, well done, you're so clever, even though you know that they always pick that canter lead up. So that when you go over to the other canter lead and you know that they're not going to pick that one up, you can say, I want this one, I want this one, I want this one. And then you might get to the 5th or the 6th ask and you know you're not going to get it. You can go back to that other one and get that one and finish on a positive note. It's a bit of a cheat, but at least you've shown your horse where the win is, where the reward is. If you guys just get super frustrated that you can't get this other canter lead, you still want to finish on a good note. So you can go back over to that easy canter lead and say, yay, you're amazing, you got it. And then you would hop off, you'd actually finish. And then, so your horse is kind of thinking in between that session and the next session, they're like, oh, what did you just hop off for? Why did I get that break there? Even if you have the opportunity to like put them in a stable or something so that they don't have like lots of things to distract themselves, and it can actually make them think a little bit more about what they've learned. So that the next time, and it might take a bunch more times before they figure it out, but they start to go, oh, when I do this, you hop off. And, you know, that's the big win. When we've spoken about what your horse wants, that's their big win, is that you hop off. So you can gradually work that across to that other leg as an encouragement that if they pick up the canter lead that's hard for them, then you'll get off for that. And that's their big win. And so slowly they'll get more enthusiastic about picking up that canter lead. So if just thinking about different situations where this happens, definitely, putting the pole down. Oh, that's right. The question was, if you get to the 3rd ask and your horse isn't tired yet, then you can give a couple more asks, but they are going to get more and more tired each time you ask. And you can come back to that exercise again, like further into your training session. So if you get one good canter lead each way, perfect, excellent, have a break, change the exercise, show them that was their win. Typically, I would probably give them a long rein walk after that as well, before I went back into training. And then you can ask it again within that training session. So you just have to keep an eye on, like, the more tired your horse gets both physically and mentally, the harder these exercises that are hard for them become. So if you've spent your whole training session getting that one canter lead and you go, yes, I got to get it again, then, you know, that's when you're not going to get it again, and you're not going to be able to finish on a good note, because your horse is so buggered, it's like giving you its canter lead on this one last ditch effort for you to leave it alone. So that's when, you know, we're trying to keep our ego in check, and we're trying to finish on a good note, feeling like we could have done more, so that the next time we have a better chance of making our horse more enthusiastically look for the correct answer. So that's where it becomes really important to assess your horse with those canters. So as we were saying, if you do like a couple of nice strike-offs into canter, you're like, okay, my horse understands the canter on aid, then you do a couple of strike-offs to get your canter lead. You're like, okay, my horse understands the canter lead. Then you can focus on maintaining the canter for periods of time. If you get to that, you know, you've asked a bunch of times to get the canter and you can feel that they're tired, then you're not going to be maintaining the canter for periods of time. So you've got to figure it out for your horse and where your horse is at, and then you're going to get it wrong sometimes. So don't be too defeated or too disheartened if you did accidentally go, you know, 1 or 2 over. It means that you need to rein yourself back in for the next ride and not be too enthusiastic. Hi, Yvonne. Hi, Jane. Hi, Zane. Good to see you guys here watching. So we're just talking about our canter leads, and I'm about to wrap it up actually. So you might have to rewatch from the beginning to get the little hidden gems in here. So with when your horse does get into the canter, we're rewarding for the transition into canter first. If our horses are going into canter easily, then we're rewarding for the correct canter leads. If they're not getting the correct canter leads, then we are assessing ourselves and our horse. Are we being clear in our cue for getting that canter lead? Is our horse straight and balanced and evenly developed to be able to pick up that canter? And then that's where you will dig in from there. So if you know that your cue is perfect, then you're going to have to reassess where those building blocks are that build your horse up to that point that they can easily pick up the canter lead. And we want to put a pole down for the canter lead so that they're actually jumping into canter instead of just pulling themselves into canter. If we do a couple of canter transitions, they do a couple of nice ones, we can give them a break, give them a long rein, and then we can ask again further on in the lesson, keeping aware of their physical and mental fatigue. If we're kind of getting, you know, to that 40-minute hour mark and we're still just trying to get a canter lead, then we're going to finish for the canter lead that we're happy with. And if we've got to that hour mark, hour and a half mark, and we still haven't got our canter leads, then you really need to go back to the drawing board and assess, does my horse understand what I'm asking of it? Can my horse do what I'm asking? So I hope that has kind of pulled together the whole ramblings of our training. We can, if you have specific questions to your horse, I should maybe be able to troubleshoot them just over a conversation in the group. Maybe not. It can be a bit tricky if I can't ask all the questions I need to ask to do all the different pathways where the canter leads can go wrong. But if you're really struggling, the Green to Self Carriage course is putting together all of the exercises that you need to develop straightness in your horse so that canter leads become easy, which we're currently beta testing and is significantly discounted during the beta test. So yeah, thanks for popping by, guys. And if you have any fun suggestions for training next week, or you have any issues that come up with your horses in the meantime that you'd like me to cover, shoot us a message, post it in the group, whichever suits. And Jane is currently on at the moment, and she is your essential oil girl. So if you have any questions about essential oils and horses, then I think hopefully we'll be able to do a little training on that as well. And basically just how essential oils can help horses and help with developing our relationship, more so than actual therapeutic application, because we don't want our horses not reacting the right way to the oils. We just want to understand how it can help with that relationship development. Okay, so see you later. Have a great week. Bye.